Brian Hooker thought he had committed the perfect act of deception. He thought the dark, silent waters of the Sea of Abaco would swallow the truth about his wife, Lynette Hooker, forever. He looked authorities in the eye, and he spun a masterful, tragic tale of a sudden storm, a violent wave, and a desperate husband helplessly watching the sea take the women he loved. For exactly 2 months, Brian Hooker played the role of the grieving widower perfectly, banking on the one terrifying advantage of a deep-sea disappearance: no human witnesses. But Brian Hooker made a fatal mistake. Actually, he made 5. He forgot that the ocean doesn't keep secrets when machines are watching. Caught in the lies. 5 pieces of evidence against Brian Hooker. Tonight, we are not just questioning his story. We are going to show you exactly how his flawless alibi was completely obliterated. Lynette Hooker did not simply vanish into rough waters on the night of April 4th. The narrative Brian Hooker built is entirely falling apart, and the breadcrumbs he carelessly left behind have painted a chilling picture. Federal investigators are no longer treating this as a tragic boating accident. They are methodically preparing an inescapable criminal case. Brian Hooker is completely exposed. Legal experts consider his arrest imminent, and a high-profile trial is looming right around the corner. He thought he left no trace, but he is about to be undone by his own actions. To understand exactly how the net is closing around Brian Hooker, you have to look at the absolute foundation of his lie, which brings us to the first piece of evidence that shatters his alibi: the physical impossibility of the water. His entire defense hinges on the violence of the ocean. He claimed that after leaving the Abaco Inn, he and Lynette Hooker were hit by severe, chaotic weather. He explicitly described waves so rough and violent that they physically bounced his experienced wife out of the 8-foot dinghy, while strong currents instantly ripped her away and dragged his disabled boat 4 miles into the dock. It sounds like an unstoppable act of nature, but meteorologists and marine tracking data analyzed the exact coordinates where Brian Hooker claims this horrific accident took place. The location was not the raging open ocean. It was inside the Sea of Abaco, in sheltered water less than 10 feet deep at high tide. While there was wind that night, wind in shallow, protected water creates minor surface chop, not the violent, ejecting wave action required to forcefully bounce an adult out of a boat. The violent sea Brian Hooker blamed for the loss of Lynette Hooker simply did not exist in that specific location. The physical mechanism of his story is a proven impossibility. But if the ocean didn't separate them, what did? That terrifying question leads directly to the second piece of evidence, the chilling 24-hour gap of isolation. According to his own established timeline, after drifting for hours and washing ashore near Marsh Harbor at 4 in the morning, he raised the alarm and was taken back out to search. But after just a few hours of looking for his missing wife, search and rescue teams returned Brian Hooker to his anchored sailboat, the Soulmate. And they Saturday, for nearly a full 24 hours, while a massive, frantic search operation scoured the open water for Lynette Hooker, her husband remained isolated on his boat. He didn't demand to stay on the water. He didn't patrol the shorelines, and he offered no new details with any sense of urgency. His own friends who recorded his phone calls were utterly baffled by his disturbing apathy. If you genuinely believed your wife was fighting for her life in the dark ocean, would you go back to your cabin and simply wait? This behavioral evidence shattered his carefully crafted image as a desperate survivor. But the horror of that 24-hour gap is magnified exponentially by the third piece of evidence, which stands as the most damning technological betrayal in this entire investigation. While Brian Hooker was sitting comfortably on the Soulmate, he was literally surrounded by state-of-the-art marine technology. Mounted directly on the mast of his sailboat was a $33,000 FLIR system, a military-grade marine thermal imaging camera. This is a highly specialized machine specifically engineered to detect human heat signatures in pitch-black water. It is built for the exact nightmare he claimed to be living. If Lynette Hooker was truly lost in the dark ocean, that camera was her best chance of survival. Yet, during those critical first days, he never deployed it. He never turned it on to scan the horizon. Even more incriminating, he deliberately withheld the existence of this camera from the Coast Guard and Bahamian police. It took a full month before a mutual friend casually mentioned the thermal camera to federal investigators, who were absolutely stunned by the revelation. Why would a husband hide the existence of a heat-seeking camera while his wife is missing at sea? The answer is as terrifying as it is undeniable. You don't use a thermal camera to search if you already know the truth, and you absolutely hide a cloud-connected surveillance system if you are terrified of what it might have recorded you doing that night. The silence of that camera speaks volumes, but Brian Hooker's own careless words proved to be his ultimate undoing. The fourth piece of evidence is a single, devastating sentence hidden in a private text message that fatally contradicts everything he told law enforcement. In his official police statement, he claimed Lynette Hooker was swept away by a strong, overpowering current, vanishing helplessly into the darkness as he drifted in the opposite direction. But 2 days after she disappeared, he texted his friend Daniel Danforth to explain his version of events. In that private message, he typed that after she went into the water, Lynette swam towards the sailboat before they lost sight of each other around sundown. She swam towards the sailboat. Let the sheer gravity of those words sink in. A person swept away by a violent current is a helpless victim of nature. A person deliberately swimming toward an anchored sailboat is a highly capable, oriented survivor making a targeted push toward safety. Those are two entirely different physical realities. If Lynette Hooker swam toward the boat, every single search grid, every drift model, and every rescue operation based on his first story was a complete waste of time. He deliberately sent search and rescue teams on a wild goose chase looking for a drifting victim, while privately admitting his wife was swimming right back to their anchored vessel. He sent the authorities to the wrong water. This wasn't a minor inconsistency due to trauma. It was a fundamental alteration of the facts. Revelation, and that leads directly to the fifth and most devastating piece of evidence, the final nail in the coffin of Brian Hooker's lies. If Lynette Hooker was actively swimming toward the soulmate, did she make it? He insists she didn't. But an unblinking, private surveillance camera hidden in the nearby lovers' quarters area caught a terrifyingly different story. According to explosive reporting, this camera recorded highly suspicious light activity directly around the anchored soulmate well past midnight. This was during the exact window of time when Brian Hooker claimed he was miles away, drifting helplessly in a broken dinghy, and the sailboat was supposed to be completely empty and dark. Someone was undeniably on or around that boat in the middle of the night. Compounding this surveillance footage is a piece of physical evidence that he cannot possibly explain away. When investigators finally seized and searched the soulmate, they found Lynette Hooker's Apple Watch aboard the vessel. It was the exact same watch she was photographed wearing at the Abaco in Alia that very evening. If she bounced off the dinghy miles away and was swept out to the open sea, how in the world did her watch travel back to the sailboat? The answer is brilliantly simple and utterly chilling. She never bounced off the dinghy. Or if she did, she made it back to the boat. The surveillance lights and the Apple Watch completely obliterate his alibi, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the tragic events of April 4th did not happen in the open water. They happened exactly where the lights were flashing, right there on the soulmate. With these 5 pieces of indisputable evidence stacked against him, Brian Hooker is now completely and utterly exposed. The false narrative he peddled to the media and the authorities has been entirely dismantled, piece by piece. He is no longer viewed as a tragic widower. He is the prime, solitary target of a massive, escalating federal probe. The walls are rapidly closing in around him. The United States Coast Guard Investigative Service and specialized marine forensic units are no longer conducting a standard search and rescue mission. They executed a complex, offshore interdiction operation to physically seize his sailboat from the ocean. They towed the soulmate to a secure federal facility in Florida, where forensic teams are tearing it apart plank by plank. They seized the dinghy. They deployed specialized canine units across the vessel to search for critical clues. They are currently extracting the heavily guarded cloud data from the very thermal camera he tried to hide, and they are pulling his electronic GPS data, which has already proven that his digital footprint does not match his spoken alibi. Every single lie he told has been met with a technological truth. The federal authorities now hold the boat, they hold the electronics, and they hold the physical timeline of that fateful night. The investigation has reached an absolute boiling point. The current silence from law enforcement is not the silence of a cold case fading away. It is the calculated, determined silence of federal prosecutors building an airtight, inescapable indictment. Legal analysts and true crime experts watching this case unfold are deeply confident that we are witnessing the final stages of pretrial preparation. It is highly anticipated that very soon, the doors will be kicked in, Brian Hooker will be formally arrested, and forced to face a jury in a high-profile criminal trial for the tragic loss of Lynette Hooker. The man who arrogantly thought the ocean would wash away his secrets is about to be completely overwhelmed by the sheer, crushing weight of his own digital evidence. But beyond the GPS data, the seized boats, and the impending legal storm, the most haunting truth of this entire case comes not from a machine, not from a camera, but from a grieving mother. For 2 agonizing months, Darlene Hamlet, Lynette's mother, maintained an unbearable, dignified silence. She watched the search fail. She watched the man she entrusted with her daughter's life walk free. She listened to the inconsistencies, the lies, and the pathetic excuses. But when the evidence finally became too loud to ignore, she sat in front of a microphone and spoke 11 words that will forever define this tragedy. She didn't talk about the weather, or the dinghy, or the ocean currents. She looked straight ahead and said, "He took her last breath, and threw her away like trash." That is the horrifying reality that the evidence points to. Lynette Hooker wasn't a victim of an unpredictable ocean. She was a victim of the person she trusted most in the entire world. As we wait for the inevitable moment the federal authorities move in to make an arrest, we are left with a chilling realization. Brian Hooker lived with this woman for 25 years. He knew her family, her laughter, her habits. Yet, somewhere in the dark waters of the Bahamas, a calculated decision was made that ended it all. The machines recorded the truth, and the evidence survived the sea. Now, the final question isn't whether Brian Hooker lied. We know with absolute certainty that he did. The question that should keep you awake tonight is this: what really happened in those dark, isolated hours on the sailboat before the lights finally went out? And just how long did Lynette Hooker fight for her life before the sea went entirely quiet?